I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Kirby Rosplock.
I love the work that I get to do. I feel very blessed and honored. Every family I meet is so unique and very different. We forget a lot. In fact, we forget 70% of what we learn in just a 24-hour span if it's not reinforced.
A lot of these subjects take way longer than you would think. They're anything but transactional because we're talking about family and the nature of families and the nature of individuals and humans. You can't rush that aspect, yet you have to bring the intentionality to that.
Not one government, not one country, but actually the individual has so much power and influence if they engage.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Kirby Rosplock. Now, those of you that have been in the wealth management, family wealth industry, you're going to know the name Kirby. I was a bit starstruck when I first met her because I knew Kirby through her work. And so to meet her in Boston several years ago in conversations with the Family Wealth Alliance, and then building a relationship with her, I have got so much respect for her knowledge, her lived experience, and how she approaches this subject matter. So it's just a treat for you listeners to be able to have this time with Kirby today. Now, those of you that may not know who Kirby is, I'm actually going to read a little bit of the bio just so I don't mess it up and we get this right. So first, I'm going to go through one piece here, and then we'll add a little bit more context. Kirby Rosplock was born into a very successful, enterprising family. Kirby learned family wealth basics the way most affluent offspring do or don't, in real time around the board or dining room table. Humbled by her upbringing, today Kirby is a recognized teacher, advisor, author, and speaker in the family wealth industry. She is the founder of Tamarind Partners, a research advisory and consultancy firm where she and her team work with families, operators, advisors, and institutions connected to the family office landscape. Kirby provides leading-edge insights, knowledge, and family education that is curated, practical, and hands-on. She speaks and consults internationally on her research, books, and experiences with wealth and enterprising families. I would be remiss if I didn't mention she had her MBA from Marquette University, so Kevin Nolte on our team is going to be really happy. I'm giving a shout-out to Marquette here. And then also has her PhD. Kirby's thesis for her PhD work was women's interest, attitudes, and involvement with their wealth. But it's not just women. I, for one, will attest her insights, attitudes, perspective, understanding of this subject matter is very broad, very technically deep. And again, I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with Kirby. So Kirby, welcome with that introduction. So glad that you are here, even virtually. Because things come up with families, and that is what prevented us from being together in the studio. But that's the nature of this work too. So thank you for being here, and so listeners can get to know you a little bit more than my introduction. Share a little bit. Who is Kirby Rosplock?
Boy, that's quite an introduction. I am humbled, and honestly, I think I need to have you as my personal spokesperson, John. You're so kind and generous with all the accolades. Who is Kirby besides that bio? I'm a mom. I have 2 daughters who are amazing, and I think they're my greatest works, even though I've written 4 books now. I am an adoring wife to an amazing man who's been married with me for 25 years. So that tells you a lot. And he's also like my co-preneur, and we like to work together as well as being married. I love to travel. And, I think my upbringing is kind of how I circuitously got to the family office space and not knowing it would actually become a career. I always joke, I sometimes say to family office professionals, I'm like, when you were in kindergarten, was this ever on your list of potential career opportunities? And everyone's like, no, firefighter, policeman, investment banker, lawyer, doctor. But family office is such a niche and bespoke world that I have to be truthful that so many people I talk to about it think I do interior design for the office. And I always have to say, no, it's not exactly like that. But I love the work that I get to do. I feel very blessed and honored. Every family I meet is so unique and very different. And, everybody is in transition right now in terms of like life transitions, family office transitions, even what kind of kept me from being there today, whether it's management, ownership, or leadership transitions. And I love that work. I mean, I really do. I find it so exciting, and it's like a puzzle that
Yeah.
never goes together the same way in every family.
Yeah. And we'll go deep technically, and from a practitioner's viewpoint, from an academic viewpoint. You mentioned the 4 books. I have the Complete Family Office Handbook on the desk here too. We'll be referencing some items of your work, and that's how I got to know you, is through your writing, your work, the individuals that you brought together to compile really great just reference tools for the industry very broadly. But your lived experience is also what you draw upon. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that lived experience and your family history, so people get to know you a little bit from that viewpoint too?
Yeah, happy to. And it's interesting because none of my books talk about me. None of my books talk about my history. And I think for a lot of folks who are born into or grow up in an enterprising or wealthy family, that narrative, that personal narrative of like, how do you tell your story without either sounding like, gosh, my family was so important, or like you're kind of demeaning your family or your history. So I do say often that I was born into that DNA lottery of good fortune. My great grandfather and his brothers were timber men and very gregarious, and they set up hundreds of partnerships, and they literally timbered the entire eastern seaboard. So from upstate New York to the tip of Miami. So again, that was 100 years ago, right? So it started in the late 1800s. And by the 1900 early turn of the century, they were timbering that whole eastern seaboard, which is what we think of the 95 corridor highway. So we own coke mines, coal mines, railroads, would set up a town, bring 100 men, timber tens of thousands of acres, schools, general store, commerce, and then we'd buy the next tract of land and set up railroads going all the way down. So that was the origin story of family wealth. By the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, management consultants told us, hey, you diversify. That's how you sustain wealth, right? So we ended up setting up lots of other operating companies, from um, hotels to sugarcane property to peanut plantations to the largest sort of working ranch in southern Florida. And how does this have bearing on my life? Well, my grandfather had 4 daughters, and he was passed on the mantle of leadership in the family. But it's kind of a male dominated industry, right? Timber was back in those days. You didn't see a lot of women with their lace up boots and their bonnets going out there chopping wood. So I sometimes say they're lumberjacks. There weren't really lumberjills. And I think it was really hard for women, especially in my family, to figure out what their role was, because it wasn't like the mantle was going to be passed down to them. So my dissertation, you mentioned that was kind of one of the reasons I wrote about this topic, because I saw this disconnect of so many women, particularly inheritors, who didn't feel empowered by the families and the infrastructure and the businesses that they were born into. And I wanted to know more why. Like what was it about women oftentimes that they didn't feel that there was a runway to come into an operating role or a business role? You asked about like, well, I actually never worked in my family business. In fact, I missed a shareholder meeting and a board meeting. And I got sort of named to be a representative on the board for missing that meeting, because my brother and sister were like, yeah, we're on the call. We're not doing this. And so I had the dubious honor to step up. And at that time, the family business was almost 130 years old. There'd never been a woman on the board. So I I kind of got to break new ground with my aunt, who she too was sort of the designated one in her family branch. But that was sort of my backstory to get to do the work that I'm doing, and ended up having my securities licenses, working in a broker dealer, working in another management consulting firm, and then a decade inside of a pretty well known multifamily office. And so I sort of combined my backstory with a lot of research, a lot of writing, wrote a book for that one MFO, then 2 editions of the Complete Family Office Handbook, and also wrote the Complete Direct Investing Handbook. So those are sort of the 4 books, and lots of chapters in other people's books and articles and so forth.
Yes, and so the aspect, this is personal to you. This work is personal because you're talking about this at the dining room table, right? And at the boardroom table within your own family, let alone coming alongside other families in terms of how they're trying to navigate it. And I think that combination of your lived experience versus your technical academic work, and then the practitioner component of this, of sitting with other families, of how they're trying to make sense of the world, I think is why it's just fantastic. And again, I'm humbled that you've carved out the time to have this conversation. Because we could talk about, and you could speak to so many different topics. So how do we limit that in the time that we have here? And so with that, I'd like us to focus on this concept of family governance. That's a broad topic into itself, right? So that'll take up more than enough time as we go through it, and I'm sure we'll salt and pepper other items in. So lesson number 1 learned is don't miss a family meeting, don't miss a family board meeting, or you're going to be voted on. So that's lesson number 1. As we talk about entrepreneurial legacies and the role of governance in that, actually the place I want to start with is what is governance? And then we can come to family, and we can talk about the difference between agency and governance and how that operates in business governance versus family governance. But first of all, like what is governance to you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, we think of governance, we think of government, we think of being governed, we think of like, what are the rules of the road when it comes to engagement? And so the thing that's a little tricky about governance is that it actually manifests itself in all these different places. Our industry likes to talk a lot about family governance, which is really how do families make decisions. But that has tentacles into areas like corporate governance, board governance, investment governance, trust governance, even estate planning has a lot of governance just embedded into the documents. And I think one of the challenges for families is trying to identify what are their rules of the road, what are their operating norms as a family, and how does that actually dovetail with all the actual legal governance that are built into all those documents that I'm talking about, right? There's a board charter. There's a investments policy statement that has governance about how the assets might be governed. And that is the real art and science of governance.
Well, in taking the estate planning documents, in the legal aspect and ownership, there's a component to simplify it, maybe for some to think about, your operating agreements when you talk about, well, who's the membership and then who's the management of how that's working. In the trust documents, pointing more towards the legal aspect, the ownership aspect, a little bit more of that, who's the member, and then the governance towards, well, how does that get managed to fulfill what the ownership wants in the membership component. When we talk about entrepreneurial legacies and the legacy side of it, too many people think, well, my legacy is what I'm leaving. It's the inheritance that I'm leaving behind in legal documents, tax returns, financial accounts, et cetera. And it's like, well, no, that's not the legacy. What's the impact that you're making on your family, the world around you, and how that operates, right? That's where, a lot of the conversations we've had are, point to legacy beyond the documents. So when you think about legacy, when you think about estate planning and then how governance fits in, is there a framework that you bring to that in your thought process of how that all connects for individuals as they think about it?
Well, I'm a big believer that you have to separate the structures, like what a board does, from the directions, like the board charter telling how the board operates. And for a lot of families, when we get to like estate planning, it's important to really understand the mechanics of the estate plan, not just by mom and dad who set up their estate plan, but eventually what impact is my wishes, the rules of how I want my wealth to pass or my business to pass. How is that going to impact the next beneficiary or the next beneficial owner? And so there's a lot that has to be unpacked for families to be successful to make those rules work. And oftentimes families structure everything, they have it all written down, but they haven't lived what they want the experience to be once that event happens, once their death happens. And so it's almost like in a lockbox where they think, okay, well, the executor will unpack this when I'm not here. But the power of actually preparing families for the future governance and the impact that, the wealth transfer event or the business transfer event will have is super important, because nobody likes to have a bomb dropped on them and then try to like clean up the mess. It's much more helpful to have expectations of like, oh, actually, the ownership is going to flow in this kind of way. What if the company is held in trust? You thought you were inheriting the shares and the interest directly, but no, no, no. There's a corporate trustee, there's an independent trustee or professional trustee. So the rules of the road, right, start to change dramatically if the family members aren't actually prepared for what governance is coming next.
One of the things that you noted in the chapter on this subject is governance very broadly, transparency and accountability that are being driven in. But when it comes to the family governance, participation has to be added. It's not just from a corporate governance viewpoint of here's the accountability, here's the audit committee, here's what we're doing in terms of transparency of information, but participation. Why did you single out participation, and then how does that get modeled out within a family so that people are understanding how to participate in the governance process? And we'll come back to what even a governance process would be.
Yes, that's a great question. No governance and no government actually works without active participation. And that, just to be clear, it doesn't mean you're active as an operator, but you have to be a good owner in the structure. And sometimes you have members that are stakeholders and are not owners, right? So often in families, maybe you're a contingent beneficiary, meaning you'll be a future beneficiary, but you're not today. So I think the clarity comes into understanding what is your role, what are your rights, and how do you actually engage in the governance system that is now and next. And oftentimes families do it well, where they have medians and mechanisms such as like a family assembly. That's a wonderful forum where every family member might be able to show up, share their views, hear about certain pieces of business or wealth that are happening. But it's not typically a place where decisions get made. It's more a place where information is shared and disseminated, ideas might be generated, discussion might be had, and feedback comes back. But that's typically not a decision-making body, right? And then you have sometimes what we talk about as a family council, and that might be a group of designated family members who meet certain criteria. And that criteria we can get into later, but that's usually where more of the family decision making happens on issues that are not, technical to the wealth or technical to how the family enterprise operates, but might have germane, impact of family stakeholders, like how much do we want to meet as a family every year, or what kinds of information do we expect all family members to be aware of and know about to be good beneficial owners? Is that helpful?
Yeah, And so I'm guessing there's some listeners out there, right? They're probably taking notes down, right? Trying to figure out. I appreciate that there's a little bit of a broad base, right? People don't want to screw up the next generation. They want to screw up their kids with the wealth. Everybody takes different approaches to the subject matter. Some want to ignore it altogether, which is making a big deal. They don't want to make as one couple said, we don't want to make it money an issue, but by not talking about it, it's an issue. It's become an issue, right? So it's like, where do you have that proverbial balance as you think about it? So as individuals, what I was encouraged by, in one of the references in the book, you hit on some research that Dennis Jaffe had done, and in Dennis Jaffe's work, there's a table that was put in here, family practices by generations, and it mentions, for example, whereas only 13% of second-generation families engaged in next-generation education, 71% of third-generation, and all of five-generation-plus families did so. So for those individuals that might be first-generation entrepreneurial wealth creators that are panicking right now, the data says just relax, right? Just take a breath, sit back. You don't have to solve this. And having that mindset, it's a little bit like moving off of the markets. You don't care what the markets did today, this week, this month, this year. The mindset shifts into decades and generations, not about like what's happening from the market. And the same is true when it comes to the subject we're talking about. Don't try to solve it all at one time. Don't be in a hurry to try to perfect this. You have to slow down and tap the brakes a bit. So when you think about it, you're the first woman represented in your family on the family board. Multiple generations later, 100 years or whatever it was later that happens, I hope that that's encouragement to others listening that take your time. Things will evolve over a long period of time. But where do people start? How would individuals that might be that, because the majority of wealth is first generation in terms of its creation. We know a lot of it gets diluted or frittered away in various ways. It's rare that it makes it through the multiple generations and the continuity within a family. So what's the encouragement to first-generation families and then coming back to others that are fourth, fifth, sixth-generation families and how they continue to sustain that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is the question that's on a lot of families' minds. And it usually doesn't start to percolate until they're thinking about a transition. So when we think about family systems, the natural order, mom and dad make all the rules, right? They decide what time your bedtime is, when we're having dinner, what your allowance is going to be, basically a lot of the operating norms of the family. And when families start to see their children grow into adulthood and they are also looking at their own mortality, they're recognizing they have to pass the baton. They need to engage family member, as adults into a new kind of capacity. So that's actually really where a lot of families start recognizing that I don't make all the decisions anymore. In fact, I've set up or I've established a wealth transfer plan, but now I actually have to groom and, encourage leadership among my children to be able to step up and feel really grounded in the roles that I've actually created for them, whether they know it or not. And it doesn't require them to necessarily always be the operator, but it means that they have to be really good beneficial owners. They need to know how their advisors, what they do for them, how they get paid. They need to know how to ask their accountant about their financial statements and how to read them. They need to be clear on, that their people, their trustee is doing the right thing and they understand what the duties of the trustee are. So I think the key for engagement and key for really helping families build that continuity plan around governance is to have an intention around fortifying them, educating them, knowing that nobody else can do their job as an owner. That's not something you can allocate to a friend. I mean, trustees play a role in this oftentimes, but it doesn't remove the fact that you have so much that you just are required to be aware of, on top of, and to keep people accountable, which means you have to participate. So back to that, governance doesn't work without participation. Well, raising really responsible owners doesn't happen without giving them the tools and the resources and really having those conversations at age appropriate levels about what it means to be born into the family that you're born into.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and so on that age appropriate aspect, and everybody thinks differently, and every child is unique, right? And every human being is unique in their own way. So how you have it age appropriate and also for addressing, but what would be some broad bands that you would look at for little ones, for the teenage years, for the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings that are, off to college, figuring out their early lives, their early adulthood lives that are maybe a little bit later in life. How do you even break that down?
Yeah. So you don't talk numbers to a 5 or 6-year-old. That is like gobbledygook, right? So the younger they are, the more concepts you're focusing on. You're helping them understand their relationship to means, the opportunities that means affords them. You're helping socialize them to the differences that they're experiencing out there. Because guess what? Even your 5, 7, 8, 10-year-old is aware. They're aware of some of the things that they might have, the toys that they might have, the experiences, the vacations. So at the earlier ages, you're helping them establish a relationship to commerce and money, and that there's a service and goods exchange, but you're not exposing them to like the number of wealth, that big number that you have. That to them doesn't mean anything. And the danger of dropping numbers to young people is that they take them out of context or they go look for it on the web and they're like, but because you've sparked a curiosity and they want to vet and verify. So it's more about establishing money values, making sure you're imparting your values, so they know how you feel about certain things. Like I'll use myself. I'm frugal. So even though I was brought up in an affluent sort of background, my parents were frugal. It's in our genes. So I really care about making my children understand what's a good value. Like, what are you buying, and is it a good value? And so they now are much more conscious consumers about what they buy. They're aware of the power of a brand, and why that's a 10x maybe increase on price on something. So younger ages, it's really those values concepts and finding those meaningful conversations. I'll give you another one where I had my, this is a few years back, but she was about 12 or 13. I had her pump gas for my car. And I was like, I want you to look at the cost of gas and how many gallons the car takes and how much money that is. And then I explained to her how many miles that we got to the tank. And then we'd calculated how far it was for her to go to soccer practice to and from most days, in school most days. And I was like, this is how long a tank of gas gets me to get around. So like now convert that cost to get you where you want to go, whether it's the mall, school, soccer practice. And then think about like that there's actually a cost, not just of my time, but like physical cost in this car to get you where you want to go. Plus then there's insurance, maintenance, and everything else. So I think it's really bringing concepts that are tangible to their age and that are interesting. I mean, people do lemonade stands, go for it. People do other kind of gimmicky things to get their kids, feeling and touching money. But most of the time now, they're not touching money, right? They're seeing influencers making money on likes. They're seeing those kinds of social media driven enterprising opportunities. And the lemonade stand is a little bit dated, I have to say. So that's the early side of it. As they get older, when they start to feel like, oh, I'm getting an allowance. There's some great software out there now that you can utilize. It's phone friendly. And I know my family will use Greenlight. I'm not a paid spokesperson or anything like that, but I will say whatever you use, it has to be something that they will relate to. I know my older daughter said to me just the other day, she's like, Mom, I love this app because I can actually see exactly my spend. I know how much things cost. I can see the interest being collected on my account because she invests as well. She can also allocate towards different savings goals. So again, I think as they get older, you have to help them understand the value of saving and not always having instant gratification around like, I have the means to buy it, so I should buy it. But do you really need it? So the needs and the wants conversations gets really palpable in the high school years, middle school, high school years. And you're starting to open up that you have means, right? You can recognize that you have means differently from your peers.
Before we move into dating
Yeah.
and peer pressure and the 20-somethings, maybe this dates me on the old school side of the lemonade stand. But our kids were in for this summer over from England. And we had a group of friends over, and the little one set up a lemonade stand. But my son-in-law took it to the extreme of, not to the extreme, he took it to the extent, which I think is great. They had to come to me as the bank and get a loan, and we made them sign a loan document and a loan agreement on that, and then they had to go to my wife in order to get their supplies together and their cost list to go to the store, and then they had to figure out their pricing and how they were doing it all. And in the end, and this will be something else we'll come back to in terms of the philanthropic aspect of it. In the end, when they paid back the loan and paid back the interest and paid their taxes on it and gave to the church in terms of what my son-in-law asked, well, what do you want to do now with what you have left? And my grandson's like, well, I want to give it to somebody who really needs it. So between my grandson and my granddaughter and thinking through, it's like, no, you can keep some of this and enjoy it. But they're like, then we want to give it to somebody that's really going to help animals. And that's what we want to do in terms of splitting the money out too. So
great.
that intentionality component of it, and how that comes alongside in the conversations and in the modeling it out, and maybe going, farther with the little one signing off on documents and crayons and whatnot. It's fun. And also, I do think, that hearing their heart come out in terms of what they wanted to do and the giving side of it, because, right, and I've talked about it so many times, right? It's only your family, charity, or taxes. And so if you can choose it to redirect it elsewhere, then do, right, in terms of what the tax code allows us to do and what that means charitably as well. But they're still little, and so we took that tack with them. But then as they get older, right, and we've witnessed this with older kids, right? My twin daughters are both married, son in a serious relationship in their 30s now. But when they start getting into those years where they're knowing that they're different, quote unquote, from a economical viewpoint, their friends know it. The pressure that comes on to an individual growing up, your children growing up in that way. How does that affect them when they're in their teenage years? That if families aren't in tune with that, they may be missing a need and the pressure. And frankly, I think kids have more pressure on them today through social media, as you mentioned, and what they're seeing online than ever. And if families aren't having the conversation with their teenage kids, maybe even younger, but especially with their teenagers coming into their 20s, on the subject and how to handle that and handle what others may be saying about them in school or in their sports clubs or whatever it might be, that's a real tricky space to navigate. What encouragement or thoughts would you have for individuals going through those years?
Just being very close. Don't let your teen or tween really create too much space from you, because I think they are operating in several different planes, and we might just be in the physical and maybe doing some, online stuff and working with our clients, but their social media channels for those that are really plugged in, it is a much more involved universe that they operate within. In fact, they're probably more comfortable texting and snapping and being at a distance than they are building, normal human connection. So I encourage parents and families to really spend time. Like, I know long card rides to soccer practice, for example, is a captive moment that my husband or I have that is really important. My older daughter loves to go on long walks with our puppies. So, I think it's really important to have those very clear communication channels. And I also want to just put out there that a lot of families need to recognize that there's so much going on developmentally at this age and stage that they might actually need somebody else professional to talk to. Even if they're perfectly well adjusted, awesome, healthy, normal kids, they don't have signs of depression. They're not, eating disorder issues or anything but I think this is such a complicated age that I want to take away the stigma from any parents who are afraid of, reaching out to a professional, behaviorist, therapist, psychologist, because they sometimes this age and stage would rather talk to somebody about how they're feeling and what they're going through than they want to talk to their parents. And, I'm going to caution all the AI psychology bots out there because that's a safe place they feel like to get feedback. But I don't think it helps with that building human connection. So if you see like stuff that they don't want to talk to you about, make sure you have the means. Make sure that they're getting their voices heard. Yeah.
And then as dating gets more serious, and that could lead to engagements, just the topic of premarital agreements, and then the son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws and individuals now that are marrying into these families, and the perspectives that they may be bringing in, and how do they get welcomed in with open arms? When are they allowed to engage in conversations? How do they get held off? I mean, there's a whole subject matter regarding that in-law relationship that comes into play.
Yep. So prenups are really relevant at this age and stage. And so as you are, even in high school, talking to your children about dating, it's good to start to create the norm about what is expected in your family. If it's a value that you have from your immediate family, or if it's like wealth that's been passed down, and then you need to explain, hey, listen, this is what our family does, and this is why. It's important to educate early and often. And you're having these conversations not once, but you're having them over the years that they're dating, so that by the time they find the one, be it a heterosexual partner or, if something else is going on, that they're armed. They're armed with the words and the knowledge. In fact, we have a prenup course that we're just about to release because we get this conversation request all the time. And most folks don't understand that if a prenup is brought up like 2 weeks before the wedding, it's null. It's not going to be good because you're doing it under duress. So that's why you actually have to have these types of conversations so much farther in advance. And you also have to make sure that it doesn't like blow up the relationship. I'm guaranteeing you that Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift have a prenup. Like, I don't know what it says, but I'm 100% confident that they're both very affluent. They're both very successful, but they both have to protect the tremendous brands and the tremendous wealth that they've personally built together. And I think it's really important too that prenups aren't always bad for the less endowed party. In fact, it's usually the case. I just had a conversation with another one of my family members who did not have a prenup and is going through divorce. And we talked about the fact that they would have been more likely to be favorable, probably, if they had a prenup than the divorce that they're going through right now. So I bring this up because when you're together and you're in love, you're actually looking at each other saying, well, I want to be more generous because we are coming together in this union. And, having also been down the road of doing a post-nup with my husband, I will tell you, monetizing a marriage when you're 5 or 10 years into it, have children, that's 100 times worse than at the front end. So.
And rightfully or wrongfully, I encourage people, I'm like, it is actually a very romantic thing to do because you're taking the money subject just off the table. Get married for the reasons that you do. You love each other. You want to go build a life together. You want to build a future together. The future you're building together can be marital property, right? It's nothing. You're both just agreeing that we're starting from the same starting point, and leave this other stuff out of it. Sometimes people roll their eyes at me thinking that, okay, this is not a romantic thing to be going through, talking to the attorneys and getting around the table. But I'd like to believe it is, right, in terms of the sincere, because we've both seen the relationships when that becomes a subject, that it does blow up engagements, and has and can. And I don't know, maybe that's a good thing if motivations were not in the right place, and it's flushing that out a little bit too. So that's the premarital agreement. Now, before we keep going on, because I want to keep going on with various topics.
Yeah.
You mentioned the new course that's starting.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about who is Tamarind Partners, who is Tamarind Learning, the organizations that you're running right now. Because the other thing, Kirby, that I encourage always, sometimes you can trace it back to a first generation that was the wealth creation. But I think people end up in a very healthy place when they think like first generation of saying, I got a head start in life, but I'm going to go off and create something of my own. You're part of that. You're leveraging maybe the family in that. So who is Tamarind Partners? What's Tamarind Learning, and what are your ventures?
Sure. Thanks so much for giving me that little platform. So Tamarind Partners, we are a family office consultancy. We have been around for over a decade and have worked with some of the most incredible families. And I can't tell you any of them because I sign NDAs. But I think you can be aware that, just since 2019, we've tripled the number of family offices. It's staggering, right? And so with all this first generation wealth that's been even created in the last 2 decades, I would say 80% of the family offices that are around today are first gen, right? They're still controlled by the wealthy matriarch or patriarch or founder. And so there's just a lot of help needed between owners and operators. And I sort of feel like that family office whisperer that's helping the executives, stay in line with the family owners, as well as educating all the family stakeholders who have something to gain or lose, right, by what fact pattern they were brought into. So Tamarind Learning, this is the sister company. We created this education technology platform that gives families the opportunity in a no sales, no pitching, there's nothing untoward, there's no sponsors, to find a quiet environment for their family members to learn, right? Everything that you don't get from an MBA, everything if you are an art major or a vocal major like my daughter, right? You need to know a lot of things about the family you're coming into. And so, we have a whole curriculum that focuses on beneficiary wealth education, and it helps advisors be able to play a participatory role and support them. Estate planning, trust, tax. What does it mean to be a beneficiary? What's a trustee? How does the trust get administered? So those are just some of the topics. And then we're starting this whole masterclass series. And Emily Bouchard is an author. She's also written a book on prenups. And she's really an advocate for families and family members to make sure that they do the prenup conversation right. And they set it up so it has legs and success, and it doesn't lead to conflict. In fact, it creates harmony and union, and it really helps them feel empowered, this new couple to feel empowered by this union.
Again, so many items and so many paths I could go down. When you talk about single family offices, multifamily offices, the different roles that we all play coming alongside of families. There's no one individual that can run a single family office and do everything, or even a small team. Everyone has to reach out and have those conversations with others. You even mentioned talking about the kids. Sometimes everyone may need to go and speak with a counselor of some sort in terms of whatever it is that they're trying to process, to have that third-party individual speaking into how they're approaching things. At Clearwater Capital, we don't look at ourselves as trying to do everything, but the network of individuals to be able to tap into that we know within this broad-based community is significant. But within these families and within the organizations, tapping into the broad network of expertise to come alongside, whether that is the estate planning attorney, the M&A attorney, the family coach, the governance expert. So there's so much to learn. So there's so many different individuals that play different roles, right? We look at ourselves as the CFO back with the family, but we're not trying to be all things, right? And there's aspects that we tap into others. You and I contacted you at one point and said, hey, with this family and facilitating this family meeting and for one day and them coming together and them then leveraging off of Tamarind Learning too, it's one of those items where it's playing the long game, but the intentionality behind that and saying, no, somebody like Kirby, you're going to bring way more value into this family in speaking in a different way than I could do that, right? So we've got as we're leveraging one another in that. The education component that you mentioned, you write about, you research about, you speak to, you've built Tamarind Learning to do this very thing. Why was that such a passion project for you to build out the educational side of this work?
So I grew up also with an institutional background and saw the challenges, right? It's very difficult. Wealth management firms, registered investment advisors, broker dealers, they're not technology firms. They're enabled by technology. And strangely enough, Tamarind Learning was inspired by a client of ours who had a lot of complex issues. It was a blended family. We had two different learning levels in the family. And we knew that some family were really advanced on certain things and others were very novice and early in their stage of development. So, a boardroom is in that level playing field. And that's where 90% of wealth management conversations happen. When we think about, most advisors are coming to people's houses, they're sitting down, they're saying, here's all the information, this is the things you need to know to make this decision. But guess what? We forget. We forget a lot. In fact, we forget 70% of what we learn in just a 24-hour span if it's not reinforced. So, most families are having these one-off conversations with their advisors once a quarter, twice a year. I can't remember what I had my last conversation about. So we needed a durable learning solution that allowed people to go and say, I can go back and look this up, or I can get prepared to have these conversations, or I can prepare for my conversation with my John Sleeting or my accountant or my attorney. And so this was this missing link, right? This was this missing piece of information that was a durable learning solution that was private, that was sustainable. And guess what? I don't know about you, but this rising gen is highly tech enabled. They don't necessarily want to have to do everything through a person. They want to do it for themselves on their time, anywhere, if it's in their pajamas or at their lunch break during, the day. So this is where technology really needed to step up and fill the void and also be a complement to the advisor, not a competitor. So we want the advisor to actually look really good and do what they do best, which is advise. But most of them don't want to be in the hot seat of having to develop curriculum and having to figure out the technology to enable it.
Then you end up with the back to the age appropriate piece of it, right? So how, whether it be kids in school, out of school, young adults starting their professional lives, whatever. And then you're saying, now here's a new homework assignment. With the incentive of getting the passing grade, this incentive of finishing a semester, the engagement side can be really a challenge then back for families, even when it is tech enabled, and how great your content is, because I've seen it and worked through it, how great it is, but then telling a 18-year-old, a 24-year-old, a 32-year-old, log in and make sure you're doing your homework, that gets hard. Where have you seen that work really well for families where it's not one more chore that they have to do on behalf of the family, but they really do want to educate themselves?
Yeah, so learning has to have some application. It has to have some what's in it for me? If I do this, what's it going to help me do more, better, or differently? And it's not like our learning is traditional learning, like I'm going to do this homework assignment because I'm being told to do it. It's usually like understanding I'm doing this because it's going to give me something back. Maybe it's a an avenue to be eligible for a junior board. Maybe it's being eligible to sit on the family foundation. Maybe it's simply as helping me get prepared to live independently. So I'm doing work to understand how to build a budget. So I feel empowered about my personal finances and how I work with my trustee to access those funds. So it has to come back to real tangible life events at their age and stage. And it has to be tied to the incentives. I think, I'm not a big believer of financial incentives, but I'm a big believer that maybe there's paid board opportunities, and that's how you're seeing the incentive because you're now eligible for maybe a paid position within the family. Or maybe it's just being able to have more access to decision making, right? Going back to the governance conversation, a lot of family members want to feel like they have a vote or they have some ability to opine on big decisions. And so this is where you can't ask someone who's not qualified or not knowledgeable to have a voice and a vote, because that's dangerous, right? We know what happens when people who aren't privy to good information think they're ready and they actually aren't trained up to be able to be a valued contributing member. So that's where I think the incentive piece comes from, is knowing what's the carrot that's going to help them see that this is applied and this is going to help me get to where I want to go next.
So if a listener wants to find out more about Tamarind Learning, what's the website again to remind everybody here, and how do you spell it correctly?
Yes. So it's like the fruit or the spice, tamarind, Tamarind, learning.com. If you're in Canada, we have a Canadian curriculum. And so it's the same website, but .ca. And, the great news is we have the ability to let people try a course at no cost. You can see a video demo if you don't even want to sit down and do a demo with us. And if you're not even sure you're ready to do learning, we have a whole podcast library. We have a newsletter with always great recommended readings. And we have a whole bunch of free assessments. So if you're like, I want to know how my financial literacy really is, great. You want to create a wealth education plan? Great. We actually have tools that you can use and there's no charge. So we give away a ton of value, and what we really want is just families to feel empowered, that they're prepared and they're ready, and that their rising gen can take on that mantle of responsibility.
And how do you view philanthropy as part of that, and how the family is giving and viewing the world? I know we spoke previously about a big family trip that you recently had, and this subject matter. So again, the lived experience and the academic viewpoint. How does philanthropy fit into all of this, modeling out what it means, modeling out the values?
Well, philanthropy is a beautiful thing, and it's something that I think maybe philosophically feels like if you're too much is given, there's a ton of responsibility. And, I love when individuals decide to allocate, right, a portion of their wealth to things that they really care about or think are important. So, philanthropy can have many different roles in a family's life. It can be used obviously for education. I'm also a big believer that you should educate about saving and spending before you give it away. So that families are really cognizant of like what they can feasibly give away over what duration of time. The biggest takeaway for me is, what role does it play in your family? How are you demonstrating you care and you are engaged with philanthropic activities? It's not always about writing the check. Maybe it's about the experience of volunteering. Maybe it's even about the experience of connecting parties that can do good together versus just doing things on their own. And I think there's just a lot of powerful things to think about when it comes to how philanthropic values can impart your connection to your wealth, your enterprise, and the impact that you want to have in your community, locally, regionally, or even globally, right? Um, I think it also keeps people grounded if they have those values about the privilege, right, that they're in, and that there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of need out there. And if you live in a bubble all the time, it sometimes can, allow you to close yourself off to the real reality of the world, which is there's tremendous need out there, and really only the kind of impact that the ultra affluent and affluent have can make a difference. Not one government, not one country, but actually the individual has so much power and influence if they engage.
And that allocation of capital in that way, right, to make a direct impact where you're going deep. I'm a firm believer in, fewer organizations, but going deeper with those organizations. Like you said, volunteering, spending your time, maybe serving on a board, but also writing the checks, absolutely comes into play. A section in the book, just going back to reference that, how to create the family governance, right? That's the subject of a few pages here. When looking for an outside advisor, an important factor is their experience with other wealthy multi-generational families. We hit on that a little bit, right? There is a particular expertise that comes in. You're not going to go to your estate planning attorney or accountant for this work, similar to what you do. And then it goes on in different segments, talking about family councils, family constitutions. So if we just decipher a little bit of that, maybe a little bit of rapid fire in terms of some of these definitions. How would you think about what a family constitution is, a family council? What is a good family meeting? And then we're going to get into a little bit of where we've seen this go sideways, right? Some of the stories, we'll leave out the names to protect the innocent. But how would you define some of these characteristics of family governance?
Yeah, so you're talking about the mechanisms, and the Constitution, often called a family charter, is really the document that has all the provisions, the rules. And it might have everything from a code of ethics to policies around social media towards expectations about attending family meetings and who's allowed to do what kinds of pieces in the family meeting. And sometimes it even will have about governance around like the family council, which is that body that's really the decision-making body. Usually you're nominating family members with certain criteria to be eligible. So there might be age, there might be a completed college or master's, whatever you want, must be in good standing with the family. You don't want to have a family member that's trash in the family and then expects to now have representation. So there's usually like criteria around each of those bodies. I mean, again, going back to our earlier conversation, there's a need to connect the family constitution to the existing governance. I've worked with families that took a long time to look at their operating companies and their ownership of those operating companies and like to connecting the dots between their family charter to their existing documents. The family meeting is sort of the starting place for a lot of family governance. This is where families might convene for the first time. It could be informally, like we talked about, around the kitchen table. It also gets to be complex when you have 50, 80, 100 plus family members who now are all connected to a wealth pool or to multiple enterprises. So this is usually a time to share information, to get feedback, to provide updates, to bring topics up for discussion that maybe one or more committees are going to need to be informed how the broader family feels. And sometimes there's a business side of it. That family assembly can usually be a piece of that family meeting. The whole family governance component it's a work in progress, and it changes over generations, over time, as the family grows in its complexity. And oftentimes there's a need to prune the family tree at times when maybe not all family wants to continue to work together. And I think that's an important whole nother podcast that we could talk about. But families are really complex, and so they need to have governance that can reflect how they operate and how they're working together.
And again, I say it in joking, but it's not funny at all in terms of where things can go sideways or gone badly. What are some of the reasons things do go badly, right? What are some of the trends where it gets overdone, overworked, too much, too quickly? Maybe toxic individuals, personalities that are part of the family. We've all got them, right? So it's that's no surprise in terms of the human experience. So how do you manage that? Where do you see that? And what are the caution flags so people don't step on those mines?
Yeah. So, couple rules of thumb: build governance for where you are today and where you're headed tomorrow. But think about the perils of building out too much structure that next you have to amend it because you realize what you thought was going to happen didn't really happen the way you thought it. And then you've created such restrictions that it actually grinds decision making to a halt. So I've seen that happen where families thought they were doing the right thing by building on all these rules and expectations. How can family members participate? Married-ins can only do this, but they can't do that. And then guess what? They had a brilliant married in, but they didn't have a channel to allow them to engage because they made it so restrictive and so impenetrable. And then they realized, oh, wait a minute, we didn't really think this through. So don't get too far ahead of yourself. Really keep it within the bounds of what you're facing in the next 1, 2, 3 years, but don't plan for the Taj Mahal when you're not there yet. Families fail a lot over engagement. Governance doesn't work if people don't engage. And if they feel like one person is controlling all the cards and they're being manipulated like a puppeteer, families will revolt. And I've seen that happen too, where there is a family council and namesake set up, but it's really just one or two family members pulling all the strings from behind. So don't try to pull one over on your family by creating structures that are artificial in nature and they're really just feeling manipulated. And that's a big problem. Distrust that gets, seated in families around family governance can be its ruin. So I'm just very, very cognizant. I'd also just say be careful of tasking your family office executive to set up all the governance. Why? They already wear many hats. And so sometimes, again, I've seen families say, wait a minute, like that person is the key person to mom or dad or aunt or uncle. And I feel like they're perpetuating a narrative through family governance. So there is a reason that a lot of families have someone independent who has no dog in the fight and likely will not be there. For the longer term, they're there to do a job and help you get certain things set up. So that there is an important independence element. So family feel like our voices were heard. We're setting this up. There isn't anything untoward happening behind the scenes. Those are just some rules of thumb. And there's a lot more I could give you, but those are the best ones I can in a short, hot minute.
Well, and before we get to your final words of wisdom in closing here, you only have so many hours in the day, so know that you're in demand in a lot of different ways, going in a lot of different directions, and the families you're already working with beyond your own that you take on is very limited. If someone wanted to try to find someone like you, what's the best way for them to go about seeking that out for their own family?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of folks that do some variation of what I do, and there's a lot of qualified people. If it's not me, I'm also happy to refer. Like, I don't want people to feel like, oh, I'm just going to search the web and see what pops up on my screen, because that's not actually a full, safe way to find quality talent. I would say whatever you do when you're vetting an advisor, make sure to really know the extent of their bio, their background, what they've written, where they've shown up. Don't be afraid to ask for references. I think that's a pretty common thing that happens these days. Talk to other families that have worked with that individual. know the outcomes that they've achieved by working with that individual or that consulting firm, and really make sure that philosophically you're aligned with how they get paid. Flags for me are when people are like, "Oh, I'll be your family office advisor, and you can just pay me, 2% on the transaction that you do when I connect you with X, Y, or Z." And I'm like, you know, those are flags. Those are things that you should be like, wait a minute, you're going to get paid on a transaction, but you're saying you're my advisor? Like, those are no. There's something smelling a little bit wrong there. So I definitely think that commission based people who are doing that work, that's fundraising, that's capital raising, that's investment related. And by the way, there are securities laws around that. So that's a whole nother piece that people need to be cognizant of, that you should not be paying, a family office advisor on a transaction basis. That is a no. SEC will be all over you in a hot minute. So, fee for service, that's a typical fee structure. And I think it's really cognizant to know about outcomes, milestones, deliverables. What are you going to tangibly have by working with this individual? And is it aligned with what your goals are as a family?
Well, I know the family, and there's with our Clearwater Capital families that we're serving, and why my conversations with that one family in particular that you and I served together was going, okay, I've got to reach out, and here's where the family's at. The ongoing discussions, a lot of these subjects take way longer than you would think. They're anything but transactional, because we're talking about family and the nature of families and the nature of individuals and humans. You can't rush that aspect, yet you have to bring the intentionality to that. And I know the value that you brought to that family, Kirby, is significant. It means a lot to them, so it means a lot to me in engaging that way. And again, I know I've learned a lot from you, from both your written work, but the conversations we've had over time, they just stick with me. And I hope for the listeners today, too, they got a glimpse of that, a bit of an understanding. If they do have any questions or want to get connected back with you, also contact us at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Shoot us a note, but go to Tamarind Learning, go to Tamarind Partners. Kirby, you're fantastic. I appreciate you so much. So I'm going to give you the final word here in closing of the words of wisdom on this whole subject of family wealth, wherever you might want to take it.
Oh, well, you know what? I'm honored to be on your podcast, and you are that kind of advisor that plays very collegially and generatively for these families. At the end of the day, I do this work not because I have to, but because I feel like compelled to do this, because I know how hard it is to face a lot of these issues. And having an advisor like you leading the charge, and also knowing the right time, I would say back to that, when do you bring in someone third party? Actually, if you have the good fortune to work with a John Sleeting and CCP Wealth, that's actually the best kind of scenario, because I think that it takes a village, right, to get through some of these major issues, and not any one person should play a central casting role. And so it's really important to reach out and make sure that you have the best team, and that your team can work well together. And I just am so appreciative of your thought leadership, you bringing these issues to bear, and having such a good time talking about them with you today. So it's really a privilege.
With that, thank you, Kirby, again. And listeners, have a blessed day. Thank you.